A cold wind moves across the sand. The night is long. The stars look down on a place that holds one of history's strangest stories. It is the tale of a great army that walked into the desert. It never came out. This happened more than 2,000 years ago. The year was about 524 BC. 50,000 men, they say. 50,000 souls who marched into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Egyptian Sahara. They were sent by a powerful king on a mission of conquest and retribution. But the desert had other plans. The silence that followed their departure has echoed through the centuries, creating a mystery that endures to this day. They were soldiers, but also men. Sons brothers. They carried weapons of bronze iron weapons. They led animals laden with water and food. They followed their commanders with the discipline expected of the greatest military force of its time. Yet all of that strength, all of that purpose, was swallowed by the emptiness. The story of their disappearance is not just a footnote in a history book. It is a haunting question mark, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can be humbled by the raw power of the natural world. Their final destination was an oasis, a place of life in the middle of death. They never arrived. No messenger returned. No survivor stumbled out of the heat haze to tell the tale. The army was simply erased from the face of the earth, as if a giant hand had swept them away. The king who sent them waited for news of victory. Instead, he received only silence. That silence became a story, a legend told around campfires and in the courts of other kings. It became a warning about the folly of pride and the deep, ancient secrets the desert holds. For more than 2.5 millennia, the story has captivated historians, adventurers, and dreamers. It has become a quest for a ghost army. People have searched for them, poring over ancient texts and modern maps, hoping to find a clue, a single artifact that could solve the puzzle. Where did they go? To understand the army, we must first understand the king. His name was Cambyses II. He was the son of Cyrus the Great, the founder of the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire. This was an empire unlike any the world had seen. It stretched from the edges of India to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. It was a vast tapestry of different peoples, different cultures, different languages, all held together by the power and prestige of the Persian throne. Cambyses inherited this immense power. He was expected to be as great as his father, to expand the empire and secure its borders. He was a man driven by ambition. Some said he had a deep-seated anger. In 525 BC, just a year before the army vanished, Cambyses achieved his greatest triumph. He conquered Egypt, the ancient and wealthy kingdom of the pharaohs. This was a monumental victory. Egypt had resisted foreign invaders for centuries. By adding it to his empire, Cambyses proved himself a worthy successor to Cyrus. He declared himself pharaoh, adopting Egyptian traditions and titles. He was now not just a king, but a god-king in the eyes of his new subjects. But ruling Egypt was not easy. The land was proud, with a long history of independence. Cambyses was seen as an outsider. Ancient sources, particularly Herodotus, paint a dark picture. They describe him as a tyrant, prone to fits of rage and madness. He is said to have committed sacrilege and desecrated temples. He allegedly killed his own brother and sister in fits of paranoia. These stories must be read with caution. Why would a king send 50,000 of his men on a perilous journey across one of the world's most hostile environments? The answer lies in a place called the Siwa Oasis. Located deep within the western desert, this oasis was famous throughout the ancient world. It was home to a temple and a renowned oracle dedicated to the god Amun, whom the Greeks identified with Zeus. People traveled from far and wide to consult this oracle, including Alexander the Great centuries later. Its priests were believed to speak with the voice of the god himself. Their pronouncements held immense religious weight across North Africa. Their pronouncements held immense political weight across the Mediterranean. The mission, according to Herodotus, was punitive. Cambyses was enraged with the priests of the Oracle of Ammon. The reasons for his anger are not entirely clear. One theory, the oracle prophesied against his invasion of Egypt. Another, the priests refused to recognize his legitimacy as the new pharaoh. Another possibility, the priests encouraged local resistance against Persian rule. For a king like Cambyses, trying to consolidate power over a newly conquered land, such a center of independent authority was an intolerable threat. He wanted it destroyed. The goal was to march to the oasis, subdue the Ammonians, and effectively silence the oracle for good. Some accounts suggest orders were to enslave the inhabitants. Other accounts say to plunder the temple. It was a mission of brute force, intended to send a clear message. The campaign began with a sense of purpose. The army assembled, likely near the ancient city of Thebes, modern-day Luxor. From there, they marched into the vastness of the western desert. The exact route they took is debated among scholars. It would have followed a chain of smaller oases, life-giving stops, sand, rock. The first leg went according to plan. Herodotus says they reached the Karga oasis, the city of oasis, a vital outpost to rest and replenish. This is the last reliable report of the army. At Karga, they were last seen by people who could tell the tale. Local guides were hired to lead them across the final 500 kilometers to Siwa. This was the most dangerous stretch, a barren, waterless landscape. No settlements, few landmarks. The army depended entirely on supplies and guides. They stepped off the map, where sun and sand were king. Herodotus's account is chillingly brief. After leaving the oasis, the army was never heard from again. Midway between oasis and destination, a wind from the south, strong and deadly, arose. Vast columns of sand were lifted. The army was buried. This is the core of the mystery. A sudden, catastrophic event, a simoom, a great sandstorm. It simply wiped them from existence. No battle, no retreat, just an overwhelming act of nature. The image is powerful and terrifying. 50,000 men, their animals, struggling against a hurricane of sand. A sky turned dark in the middle of the day. The noise would have been deafening, the air impossible to breathe. Disoriented, blinded, quickly overcome, buried alive under shifting sand. When the storm passed, nothing was left to see. Endless rolling dunes, hiding a terrible secret beneath. Section 6. Theory 2. The shadow of ambush. If not nature, then perhaps man was the cause. A second major theory suggests that the Persian army was not buried by sand, but defeated by people. The desert was not empty. It was home to nomadic tribes, groups of tough, resilient warriors who knew the terrain intimately. It is possible that Cambyses' army walked into a well-planned ambush. They would have had the ultimate home field advantage, knowing the location of every well, every hidden valley, and every defensible position. This theory paints a very different picture of the army's last days. Instead of a single, catastrophic event, it suggests a campaign of attrition and guerrilla warfare. The desert tribes could have shadowed the Persian column, poisoning wells ahead of them, launching lightning-fast raids on their supply lines. They could have struck at night, causing confusion and panic only to melt back into the desert before the Persians could mount an effective response. Weakened by thirst hunger and constant harassment, the once mighty army would have become demoralized and exhausted. The final battle might have been the slaughter of a force already on its knees. This explanation makes a great deal of military sense. It explains why no one survived to tell the tale. The victors would have had no interest in leaving witnesses. It also helps to explain the lack of remains. The attackers would have plundered the bodies, taking weapons. Beyond the realms of storms and battles lies a third possibility, one rooted in myth, legend, and the supernatural. In the ancient world, it was common to see the hand of the gods in earthly events. The story of Cambyses' lost army is a perfect candidate for such an interpretation. Cambyses was portrayed as an impious king who had offended the gods of Egypt. He was marching to destroy one of their most sacred oracles. From this perspective, the army's disappearance was not an accident or a military defeat. It was divine punishment. The gods of the desert themselves rose up to protect their holy site and destroy the blasphemous invaders. This explanation is woven into Herodotus's telling of the tale. The wind from the south that buries the army is not just a weather event. It has the character of a deliberate, targeted act of divine wrath. The story served as a powerful moral lesson. Even the greatest king on earth is nothing compared to the power of the gods. Pride and hubris lead to destruction. This narrative would have been very appealing to the Egyptians and Greeks, who were opposed to Persian rule. It transformed a military disaster into a validation of their own beliefs and a condemnation of their conqueror. This theory resonated for centuries. The tale became a cautionary one, a piece of folklore that warned against disrespecting sacred places. The desert itself took on a mystical quality, a living entity that could swallow those who entered it with ill intent. While modern historians do not accept supernatural intervention as a factual explanation, understanding this theory is crucial. For centuries, the Lost Army was just a story, confined to the pages of ancient books. Many scholars had come to believe it was a fiction, a myth invented by Herodotus. Then, in November 2009, the story suddenly leaped from myth to reality. A pair of Italian archaeologists, brothers Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione, announced they had found evidence. After years of searching, they claimed to have discovered human bones, Persian-style weapons, bits of horse tack, all scattered in a remote area of the Sahara, not far from the Siwa oasis. The world was electrified by the news. The Castiglione brothers presented compelling, though not conclusive, evidence. They had found a natural shelter, a large rock formation where part of the army might have tried to take refuge from a storm. Near this site, they unearthed a mass grave filled with hundreds of human bones and skulls. They also found bronze arrowheads of a Persian design, a silver bracelet, and the remains of a horse's harness. Most tantalizingly, an earring stylistically similar to those depicted in Persian art from that specific period. They argued this was not a normal burial site. This was the scene of a catastrophe. The discovery was significant. Physical artifacts plausibly dated to the right period and location linked to Cambyses' army. It suggested that Herodotus's account was not a complete fantasy. There was an army. It did march into the desert, and it did meet a disastrous end. The Castiglione team theorized the army wasn't destroyed in a single event, but likely attacked by desert tribes and then finished off by a terrible sandstorm. Their find seemed to support a combination of the two main theories. However, the scientific and academic communities remained cautious. More than a decade has passed since the 2009 announcement, and the mystery of the Lost Army is no closer to being definitively solved. Why, in an age of satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, advanced archaeological science, does this secret remain so stubbornly buried? One of the primary reasons is the sheer scale and hostility of the search area. The Egyptian Sahara is one of the largest and most inhospitable places on Earth. It is a vast, dynamic landscape where the ground itself is constantly moving. The army did not disappear in a small, defined area. It was lost somewhere in a region covering tens of thousands of square kilometers. The nature of the evidence also presents a problem. Even if a sandstorm did bury the army, the remains would not stay in one place. Over centuries, the shifting dunes, or ergs, can move like slow-motion waves, uncovering and reburying objects. A skeleton found on the surface might have been transported by the wind and sand for miles from its original location. This makes finding a concentrated primary site, the ground zero of the disaster, incredibly difficult. It would be like looking for a handful of lost coins on a beach the size of a country, a beach where the sand is always blowing. There are also political and logistical challenges. Conducting a large-scale international archaeological expedition requires permits funding. These are not always easy to obtain. The security situation in remote desert areas can also be a concern. As a result, there has not been the kind of sustained, systematic search that would be necessary to truly investigate the claims made in 2009 or to find new evidence. Archaeology is a slow, patient, and expensive process. Finally, we are still limited by our sources. Our entire understanding of the event is filtered through the work of Herodotus, a man who wrote nearly a century after the fact and who had his own narrative biases. We have no Persian account of the loss. We have no Egyptian account. Without corroborating texts, we are left trying to prove or disprove a single ancient story. It is possible that the story itself is flawed. Perhaps the army was much smaller than 50,000. Perhaps their mission was different, so the tale ends without a final chapter. The questions linger, carried on the desert wind. Was it a storm? A sudden, violent act of nature that consumed 50,000 men? Was it an ambush? A desperate and brilliant defense by a people protecting their land and their gods? Or was the truth a grim combination of many factors? A demoralized army, weakened by thirst, harassed by enemies, finally broken by a merciless storm. Each theory rises and falls like a dune, plausible yet incomplete, casting long shadows of doubt. The truth, it seems, is as shifting as the sands that may conceal it. The story of Cambyses' lost army endures not just because it is an unsolved mystery, but because it speaks to something deep within us. It is a story about the collision between human ambition and the immense, indifferent power of the natural world. It reminds us that for all our technology and all our power, we are still vulnerable. It is a humbling tale of how a great empire, at the very peak of its strength, could be so utterly and completely erased. The 50,000 men are not just historical figures. They represent the fragility of life and the certainty of oblivion. The search will likely continue. New technologies may one day allow us to see beneath the sand in ways we can only dream of now. A chance discovery by a traveler. A new excavation may finally uncover the definitive proof that has eluded searchers for so long. Perhaps a shield bearing a Persian insignia, or a mass grave that can be conclusively dated to the 6th century BC. Until that day comes, the lost army will continue to occupy that fascinating space between history and legend, a place where fact and myth are indistinguishable. We are left to imagine that final, desperate scene. The sky turning a ghastly yellow-brown, the wind howling like a demon, the sand stinging like 1,000 needles, burying, silencing, preserving the moment forever. It is a story that has no ending, and perhaps it is more powerful for that reason. It forces us to confront the unknown, to accept that some secrets may be kept forever. And so, the desert holds its silence. The stars look down upon the empty sands, and somewhere out there, an army of ghosts marches on, forever lost in time.